All right. Welcome to DSA Inside Baseball. We're so happy to have you here tonight. Special appreciation to the Baseball Caucus, everyone from DSA Labor and National Political Education Committee that made this happen. We have a lot of volunteers who are not on the call tonight speaking, but they were a big part of making this happen. So I just want to shout out everyone who's involved. We've been talking about doing something like this for more than a year, and it's wonderful to be here tonight with all of you, taking the time to finally do this. Yes, it is time to put on the transcript. Thank you. We are ready to go. Okay, welcome to DSA Inside Baseball. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Heather Hillenbrand. I am the co-chair of DSA Labor, and I'm also a minor league baseball lover. Little known fact, or perhaps widely known fact, I'm not sure. So very quickly, if you're just joining us for the first time tonight, DSA is the largest socialist organization in the country. We have around 92,000 members right now. And we also happen to have a lot of baseball fans. If you are interested in baseball, you may be interested in our informal baseball caucus. We put on this call, we plan baseball events for our chapter, we have a chat, we do all the fun things. This call is also sponsored by the National Political Committee and DSA Labor. So DSA Labor is a body of DSA members who are active in the labor movement, whether as workers in their own union, workers on an organizing committee, stewards, union staff, academics who study unions, labor lawyers, or retirees, and other people who do solidarity labor support. So we would love to have you join. Our major priorities right now are not yet baseball. Currently, we are doing a lot of work for the Starbucks organizing drives, called the Solidarity is Brewing campaign. We'd love to have you involved with that. Our other priority campaign is currently logistics. But if you are not part of either of those and you listen to this call and think about unions and think about maybe organizing your own workplace, EWalk is a great place to go for resources for that. So we are saying union yes, all night tonight. And we are also going to give you some takeaways from this call, including the chapter kit, which will have some ideas for you to do your own baseball themed event with your chapter. So for the agenda, we're going to have a brief intro to this. There's actually a long, really interesting history of labor and baseball, which Alyssa will go over somewhat with us, and we'll provide you some more resources on that. We also have some super exciting speakers, Simon, Max, and Sean, who will tell you a little bit about their interactions as workers in baseball. And then we'll go over our chapter kit briefly and also other ways that you can support organizing. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Cleveland Guardians fan, Alyssa.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Heather. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. Like Heather said, this is something that kind of just started as some chatter about what if we did something like this, and now it's a reality. So that's very exciting and proof of what organizing can turn into. So why socialism in baseball? Well, it's no secret that Bernie, Chavez, and Castro are baseball fans, but what about this sport makes it synonymous with socialism and labor? Baseball is a working class sport and has a rich history of labor struggle. Because of this, socialists have related to baseball throughout the ages in the US and outside of the US. So we're going to start with a brief history of labor in baseball, and all of this is included in the action kit for your reference, with further educational resources linked at the end of the kit. So the first ever labor union of professional players in any sport was in baseball. In 1885, the Brotherhood of Professional Baseball Players was founded by John Montgomery Ward, who played for the New York Gothams at the time. The Brotherhood was made up of some of the best base players in baseball, and the first labor action was to found the Players League in 1890 in protest of the Reserve Clause. They took issue with the owners having control over players' salaries and ability to play for other teams. So players weren't able to choose where they wanted to go. They would just kind of be sent where the owners wanted them to be, and they didn't have any say. And fun fact is that during this time, the Boston Reds won their only season. So it took a long time and a lot of work to get from the Players League to the current MLB Players Association. But if not for the struggle, players wouldn't have won recognition in 1966 and the first ever pro sports collective bargaining agreement in 1968. This is the union that exists to this day for the MLB players. The first action by the union was to fund Curt Flood's lawsuit against the MLB. He refused to accept a trade in 1969, and the case made it all the way to the Supreme Court. While it wasn't successful, it did lead to the elimination of the Reserve Clause and built solidarity amongst players. The MLBPA now represents players, managers, coaches, and trainers from all 30 MLB teams. The union has voted to strike multiple times, the longest of which was from 1994 to 1995, when the World Series had to be canceled for the first time in 90 years. A tactic used by owners when the CBAs expire is locking out players and stadium workers as a way to pressure the players' union to concede. And this happened most recently this past year, as I'm sure most of you probably heard in the news pretty regularly. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about the most recent lockout because, as Heather said, we have Sean Doolittle on, and I would prefer to hear from him about the lockout since he lived through it as a player. But you know, the discussion around the lockout was complicated. I remember hearing a lot of fans saying the players were being selfish, making ridiculous demands, and that's honestly part of the reason why we decided to hold this event. Players are workers, and there were many other workers who were affected by the lockout too. In short, the MLBPA was demanding more flexibility, protections, and pay. Doesn't sound much different than many of the issues affecting workers organizing now at places like Starbucks and Amazon. So similar to the labor struggles of the working class, the owners of these baseball teams are pretty stinking rich. And remember, they're getting rich off of the labor of the players and the workers. Teams are mostly privately owned, but we do have some understanding of how much the teams and owners are worth. For example, the owner of the Mets, Stephen Cohen, is worth $17.4 billion and has a luxury tax named after him. We also have to assume that the owners of the Cleveland Guardians, the Dolan family, worth an estimated $4.6 billion, saved a ton of money by only changing the first few letters of the team name when we all know it should have been Spiders. So this gets us to the question that many were asking during the recent lockout. Aren't baseball players rich, and what are they complaining about money for? So some players are paid a lot. Max Scherzer, a Mets pitcher, is paid very well. He also was one of the player representatives during the CBA negotiations. But the average pay is $4.4 million. 47% of players make less than $1 million a year, and 38% make less than $730,000 a year. Bobby Witt Jr., the #1 overall prospect for the Kansas City Royals, makes even less at around $720,000. The important through line isn't just the money. Baseball players are workers. They sell their labor for our entertainment and are exploited by the bosses who own the means of labor. This mirrors how most of us live. We go to work every day, and while we get paid, the bosses get paid far more. Players work for 6 or 7 months straight during the regular season, traveling almost constantly and very quickly, and even a small injury could spell disaster for their career. Furthermore, it's not just about the major league players who are being exploited. The stadium workers, administrative staff, minor league players all deserve better working conditions and a union on top of that. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker, Simon Rosenblum Larson, minor league player for the Tampa Bay Rays AA affiliate and program director of More Than Baseball, a nonprofit dedicated to building a better future for minor league baseball players. Simon?
Hey, all. Thank you all for jumping on. My name is Simon Rosenthal Larson. I am a pitcher with the Tampa Bay Rays in the minor leagues. Was drafted in 2018 in the 19th round of the MLB draft. And I showed up knowing very little about minor league baseball and what life would be like. It was a dream come true for me. And I get to my first minor league clubhouse, and I move my stuff into a room, and it's an 8x10 room with 2 beds in it and a cot on the left-hand side of the room. And the first night I slept in that cot, it collapsed in the middle of the night, and I'm sleeping on the floor on a cot in an 8x10 room provided by the team. 2 weeks in, I get my first paycheck. It was $550 before taxes for 2 weeks of work. And at that point, I realized that something needed to change fundamentally in minor league baseball. So since then, it's been about 4 years, but I've been working to improve working conditions for minor league players and push for long-term changes for these players. And that's what I'm going to talk to you all about tonight. So I might as well get started with the context of minor league baseball and a little bit about the history of the sport. So minor league baseball began initially as a coalition of independent leagues. They formed what's called the NAPBL, the National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues, very early on. This is, in the 1870s to the early 1900s. The NAPBL is formed. In the 1930s, Branch Rickey, owner of general manager of the Cardinals at the time, he starts purchasing minor league teams, and he creates the first ever farm system as we know it today, where at one point by like 1940, he owned 32 teams and controlled over 800 players. And this was a competitive advantage for the Cardinals at the time. And they went on to win, they had, I think, a 600 winning percentage for a number of years. They won about 60% of their games. And the farm system as we know it was actually created officially in 1963 with the first professional baseball agreement, which created minor league baseball as an affiliate organization of MLB. MLB teams begin paying minor league player salaries at this time. And you see sort of the farm system take shape as we know it today. And then in 2021, as many of you may have seen, minor league baseball was absorbed into MLB. MLB cut 40 minor league teams, created roster limits of 180 players per organization, and now for the first time has unilateral control over its player development system. And this, a number of things stem from this unilateral control, but it really, small towns across the US were gutted, losing their minor league teams. This happened in Iowa, in Wyoming, in Massachusetts, on the West Coast. Teams were pulled out from under the fabric of a community. And then, so the players of minor league baseball, I am one of them. Minor leaguers are a diverse group. They're, about half players are born in the United States, 20% were born in the Dominican Republic, 20% in Venezuela, 5.5% in other Latin American countries, and about 1.5% are, from other international places. 30% have some college or degree, 44% have just the high school diploma, 26% of players have not finished high school. And these players are distributed sort of stratified, but the leagues are the Dominican Summer League, the Arizona Complex League, and the Florida Complex League, low A, high A, double A, triple A, and in total about 6,900 minor league baseball players. And so there's a number of issues in the sport. Many of you may know, you're familiar with the low salaries. We did a More Than Baseball, the organization that I helped co-found. We published a report recently on minor league baseball players and their views and the issues that they're facing. We've surveyed over 800 players and found a number of clear priorities for improvements in the minor leagues, and really wanted to sort of touch on these issues before I move forward. So the biggest issue in the sport is salary. It's the number one priority for players. Over 80% said it was their top issue. Other significant issues are in-season housing, communication, off-season training, nutritious food, equipment, and then a couple of things that I'll talk about a little bit later, but the contract, the minor league player universal player contract, is one really significant issue that players see and affects their lives pretty dramatically. 72% of players said their developmental needs were not met by their current wages and salary, and over half of minor league players felt their organization did not have their best interests in mind. Moving forward, though, into salary, this is the really significant one. The average minor league player made less than $10,000 in 2021. That's for the whole year. Players are making as little in the United States, as little as $4,800 a year. In the Dominican Republic, there are players making as little as $1,800 for the entire year to play professional baseball. The average MLB owner is worth $3.2 billion. We touched on that earlier. They're billionaires, and they're paying their workers below minimum wage. And this is doable because of a couple of exemptions to federal labor law that allow Major League Baseball to pay legally below minimum wage and not acknowledge overtime worked by these players. And moving forward sort of on the salary topic, This is the data that we collected on our report. 83% of minor league players said salary was the change they'd most like to see in the sport. And players actually told us that about $41,000, the mean amount that would allow them not to work during the offseason. We are calling on a $35,000 minimum salary for minor league players. That's a living wage for all players as a minimum salary, and obviously a salary scale from there. And as you can see on the right-hand side, it's a little small, but if you look closely, you'll see a salary scale submitted to us by a Reds player in the Dominican Summer League. And you can see that you're making $700 a week at AAA, you're making as low as $400 a week in rookie ball, and $117 a week in the Dominican Summer League. Players are working about 60 hours a week. This calculates out to less than $2 an hour for a player in the Dominican Summer League. And the players, the player salaries above as well, keep in mind that these are not year-long salaries. You're only paid during the championship playing season. So for a player in the DSL, they're making less than $1,800 a year. They're working from March to September, but only being paid from the season, which is June to August in the DSL. For other players, the AAA level, you're making $700 a week from April to September, which is still like $14,000 to $16,000 a year. Not a living wage for anyone in the minor leagues on their initial contract. Beyond salary, there's some other really significant issues in the sport. The contract, so the minor league player contract is a 7-year non-negotiable contract, denies players image and likeness rights, much like the college athletes one recently, as well as a fair grievance process. If you have a grievance with your contract, your grievance is ruled upon by the commissioner of baseball, not by an independent arbitrator, not by, forced arbitration is another significant issue, but in minor league baseball, you don't even get neutral arbitration for your contract disputes. Your arbitration is done by the commissioner, your boss. Other issues in the sport include housing. This is a significant change that happened recently. Players were advocating for better housing conditions, and it came about that Major League Baseball they chose to pay for player housing for all players. This is a huge win for minor league players and really only happened because of active organizing and advocacy. But a number of minor league players are still being left out of this policy. Players are forced to share rooms. For example, players in the Phillies organization are moving in and out of hotel rooms every week. So they're in a hotel room when they're at home. They're moving all of their stuff out of their hotel room at the end of the week, going on a road trip for a week or two, coming back and moving all their stuff back into a hotel room that they're sharing with another player. These are guys who are 23, 24, 25, 26 years old. Beyond housing, there's other significant issues in the sport, including off-season support. Players don't make any money in the off-season, but as per the contract, they're required to train during the off-season. Lack of off-season support is the third most significant issue for players. Players are spending about $300 a month on training expenses each month. That doesn't include nutrition or rent or things that they have to do in order to train successfully. And over half of players work in the off-season. So all of these issues sort of paint a really gloomy picture of minor league baseball. And really, it is a challenging place to work. It's a challenging workplace, but players are chasing a dream. But really, the working conditions are something that can be resolved through a number of different avenues. So what are the solutions? Obviously, the biggest solution here is organizing. Organizing is the long-term solution to issues in minor league baseball. Major League Baseball salaries since 1975, adjusted for inflation, have increased 2,000%. Minor league player salaries have actually decreased in value by 50%. The difference here is that minor league players are not represented by any union, whereas Major League Baseball players are. So when you're looking at this, it's pretty obvious to see the disparity here. Major League Baseball players have increased their salaries because they're getting a bigger share of the pie. Minor League Baseball players are not. There's surmountable hurdles, but there are hurdles to organizing minor league players. 74% of minor league players think they're going to be big leaguers. This is a huge issue because only about 10% of players will, but many players are willing to make a sacrifice, assuming that they're going to make it one day and get their big payday. And this was studied a little bit. There's a study done, and if you want to look at it, it's Kim et al. It was a study done at Duke, but it was a passion labor exploitation study where they found that if workers like their jobs, people, both outsiders and employers, are more willing to justify poor working conditions. And that's something that exists in minor league baseball. Is many players really love their jobs and yet are receiving really, really awful working conditions because of this. And that changes organizing. It makes it a little bit of a challenge to get players motivated. There's a mentality that if you don't like it, play better. This is a phrase that gets thrown around minor league baseball all the time, where basically you're told that if you don't like the working conditions in the sport, there is nothing you can do but be a better baseball player. that is something that permeates almost every clubhouse, and I'm sure Sean can attest to that as well in his career. And one of the biggest things is leverage. Players in the minor leagues, it's a very strange system, but players are paid by Major League Baseball teams, but work directly for minor league owners every night. So if you kind of take a power analysis look to this, minor league players are going to need allies in order to win an organizing fight. This includes fans, you all, major league players, news outlets. We need to win a fight by organizing not just minor league players, but the community of baseball to support minor league players and help build leverage. We have players all over the sport fighting for change. And this is something that's a growing tidal wave, I would say, of strength amongst players in minor league baseball. Other things that can be done, and I'll run through these quickly. There's legislation and litigation. So legislators have shown a commitment to fighting for better working conditions for minor leaguers. Senator Bernie Sanders introduced the Save American Baseball Act. There's a petition, I believe, or a letter campaign that the DSA is getting started for this. But the Save American Baseball Act would end MLB's antitrust exemption, which is a huge boon, not just for major league players, not just for baseball as a business, becoming more fair, but it would actually allow minor league players to challenge a number of the wage and salary manipulation, the salary cap basically created by the draft, because, not to get too complicated, but the non-statutory labor exemption requires that things that violate antitrust law be bargained under a union contract. Since minor league players don't have a union, they could challenge things like the universal player contract and some of the wage and salary manipulation. The Minor League Baseball Player Bill of Rights was introduced by California Senator Josh Becker. This Bill of Rights would have codified a minimum or a fair wage for minor league players, as well as a limit on contract length to 4 years, image and likeness rights, and a number of other things. That failed in committee, and MLB spent a lot of money pretty immediately lobbying against the bill. And I guess people are in the chat saying, yeah, absolutely, email your senators regarding the Save American Baseball Act. There's no co-sponsor to the bill. It's just Senator Sanders currently, and I would suggest that you all fill out the form that the DSA has provided and go email your legislators. And then there's a minor league lawsuit. Many of you may have heard of the Senna versus Major League Baseball lawsuit. Nobody knows any details. I don't know anything that you all don't know. There's nothing that I don't have any insider information, but there's a projected settlement of almost $200 million for back pay. And this could fundamentally change how Major League Baseball approaches player pay in the future, in particular during spring training, where the lawsuit found that players were in fact working. Players are currently not paid at all during spring training. Other things that you can do to help make a difference, advocacy is a huge one. Campaigns have worked. Changes in minor league baseball in recent years have come because of player advocacy, but also because of fan pressure. Minor league housing did not come about just by accident. Players were speaking out. There was an article that came out last year that a player was basically talking about the really poor housing conditions in minor league baseball. More Than Baseball, a couple of years ago, took seriously the idea of housing and went to each MLB team and presented them with a plan to improve their housing. And over the course of the next couple of years, there was significant change in the housing policy, although players were not consulted during these changes, and there were a number of issues with the policy. Nutrition. Players came out and spoke out about nutrition. They posted photos. An ESPN article came out about the Oakland A's nutrition and significantly improved nutrition across minor league baseball. During the pandemic, More Than Baseball ran a petition. We got over 600 player signatures asking for pandemic pay. Major League Baseball was planning on not paying their players at all when they canceled the season in 2020. We were able to get all 30 teams to pay their players $400 a week throughout the duration of the pandemic. Current campaigns. More Than Baseball launched a living wage campaign. If you check out the hashtag MILB35K, check out our Twitter. We've posted a number of player quotes, a number of sort of stories from players about what a living wage would mean for them. I published an op-ed in the Washington Post pretty recently about the issue of minor league pay as well. Feel free and check those things out and amplify the campaign if you can. And then spring training and extended spring training pay. Advocates for Minor Leaguers recently published a petition signed by over 1,000 players asking for back pay for spring training. This is a really important issue and something, would be a significant improvement for working conditions in minor league baseball. So check that out as well. Amplify everything you can. You have no idea how important you are in this fight. And I guess to conclude, I'm sure there will be questions, but I think, I really would like to sort of pause here and say that change happens when people work together and work and organize and sort of build a network here. If you want to advance the slide here. Change is coming right now, and we're seeing it, and Major League Baseball is sort of terrified of change in minor league baseball. Leverage is really important here, and I've sort of emphasized that. Minor league players can act collectively and organize. That's something that we're really working hard to get done in the next couple of years. But really, I want to emphasize that fans are important here. Major League Baseball doesn't survive without fans. Major League Baseball players, they have platforms and can use that to leverage and advocate on behalf of minor league players. Sean has done a really great job of this. You've seen other Major League Baseball players speak out on minor league player issues in the past as well. And you can also, I mean, you yourself can help build worker power. So sign up to volunteer, amplify, show your allyship, sign our petition for minor league player pay. You can check that out. I think a link is going to be posted as well. You can donate to groups as well. Advocates for minor leaguers and More Than Baseball are both working really, really hard to improve working conditions for players everywhere. Happy to answer any questions in the chat at some point, but thank you all. I appreciate it, and solidarity.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was excellent information that I think it's reflecting in the chat that a lot of people really didn't know, what the situation was in the minor leagues. So next we have Max Gerbach. He is from SEIU Local 1, Assistant Director of Collective Bargaining, and they are part of the ongoing efforts to support stadium workers winning a union. Max?
Hi, good evening, everybody. If you could just move to the first slide here. So just as a quick introduction, like Alyssa said, my name is Max Gerbach with SEIU Local 1. So the SEIU is the Service Employees International Union. Local 1 is the property services division that represents the Midwest in its jurisdiction. So I kind of titled this "Work is Work," stadium service workers and their struggles. And the reason why I said work is work, it actually goes precisely with what Simon was saying about the passion, labor, exploitation, which I had never heard that term before, and I'm certainly going to look into, because this definitely comes up with all stadium workers, not just the ball players themselves, because really there's a whole lot of like, well, you just, you like working here because you like being at the stadium, you like being able to catch the game, so that's the reason why we're not going to pay you anything. So let's just get into it. I kind of want to just give a brief sort of background and context before we go into some real life examples of what's going on today. So really quick, what is a union? We often take for granted that everybody knows what this is, but it's not true. Only 6.5% of the private sector in America is actually part of a union. So a union, just in very general terms, is when two or more employees of the same employer join up to collectively bargain over wages, benefits, safety, and other working conditions. Moving to the next slide then. So unions in baseball stadiums, most stadium workers, I would venture to say, are already in a labor union. For a typical 26-man roster on any MLB team, there are roughly 500 to 800 service workers who show up at every game to ensure everything kind of runs smoothly, right? There are janitors, ushers, safety personnel, concessions workers, maintenance workers, grounds crew, post-game cleanup, tarp crew, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. So for every baseball game that you like to go, you love to go see your favorite players. I'm a Guardians fan myself. I'm from Cleveland, and I'm happy that I get to say my team name now. But yeah, it's there's a whole lot of work that goes into making sure that the fan experience and the player experience is good. So next slide. So why is there such a high union density in professional sports in general, not just baseball, but we're talking about baseball today? Really, it's unexportable work. Like most of the entertainment industry, if you think like IATSE, SAG-AFTRA, WGA, like in Hollywood or New York, these jobs are generally tied to a specific geography and they can't be exported to another country. Industrial work is what most people think of when they think of the American labor movement. There's this, sort of romanticized idea of the auto industry, steel, all these kind of things, and those play a very important role in our American labor history. But management class kind of figured out how to break that power with capitalist globalization. So these days, if industrial work site unionizes, the bosses just kind of pick up their bat and ball, and my pun is absolutely intended there, and go to the global south. Right, so there's Mexico through NAFTA, there is Southeast Asia, there's basically anywhere you can go where you can kind of set up shop and exploit workers there. Next slide. So who is leading the American labor movement now? So we look to jobs that are tied to a geographic location now. So there are two examples that immediately come to mind. One is Amazon and the other is Starbucks. So Amazon can't leave because the only thing that really sets them apart is fast and free shipping. What do you think of when you think of Amazon? It's you know, you can get on, find basically anything, and it'll be your house like tomorrow or the next day at the latest. So they can't really leave. Amazon warehouses can't go anywhere. So they're stuck. They're kind of tied into their geography, and which is why one of the reasons why organizing has finally been successful there. Starbucks, again, they can't leave because who else is going to pay that much money for not great coffee? That's my own opinion, editorializing a bit here. But seriously, I'm in Cleveland, where there are now several unionized Starbucks that I'm very excited about. So I've been going a lot more often. And I encourage everybody to go there and buy coffee from your newly organized Starbucks shops. But again, it kind of stands that this unexportable work is really kind of why there's so much density. Next slide. So the answer to that question, right, who's leading the American labor history or American labor movement now is the service sector. So we need workers to be physically present, to clean toilets, serve food and drinks, sweep up peanut shells, and hose down drunk vomit after baseball games. Our members do horrible work. The stories that we hear from our members are, basically, we have about 500 per team in the Midwest that we represent. And it's absolutely disgusting because they not only work the baseball games themselves, they work all the events. So think, big arena concerts, other events like that get pretty nasty. I don't know how much I can swear here, but pretty nasty, we'll say. All right, moving on. And just a little bit of a side note on geography, I just wanted to say too. So baseball teams are closely tied to their geography, again, not just because of tradition and history, which is really important to fans, important to players, important to the workers who are there, who are generally also fans, but more importantly to the owners, because of the cold hard cash that the teams can extract in the form of publicly subsidized tax breaks. So, so they really, they get money from the public coffers, and then they, line their pockets with it. And then the taxpayers who are making that happen for them, they're pretty exploitative towards. So moving to the next one. So who does SEIU represent? Again, the SEIU is the Service Employees International Union. It's one of the largest unions in North America. There's roughly 2 million members in our union, working in healthcare, the public sector, and in Local 1's case, property services. Property services division, we represent janitors, food service, security, maintenance, airport workers, and a whole bunch of others. Move on. So in baseball stadiums specifically, SEIU, we represent several thousands of baseball stadium workers around the country. Just as a bit of background, before I worked for Local 1 in the Midwest, I'm from Cleveland originally, but I did work for Local 32 BJ, which is the biggest, it's the big East Coast property services local for SEIU. And my first negotiations that I ever sat in were with the New York Yankees. And I'm definitely of the mind that you can be a fan of the team and still hate management, but damn, the Yankees management really, really suck. They are some of the cheapest people I've ever dealt with in my entire life. However, we're going to get to the one that beats them in a minute here. So again, we represent several thousands of baseball stadium workers around the country. Local 1, like I said, our jurisdiction is in the Midwest. As far as baseball specifically goes, we represent members working for the White Sox, the Cubs, Brewers, Cardinals, Royals, Guardians, and Tigers. And then the workers who we have, it kind of varies depending on contract, what the history was in that city and whatnot. But generally, janitors, post-game cleanup crews, maintenance workers, ushers, security personnel, grounds and tarp crews, ticket takers, concessionaires in some stadiums, and salespeople and in others. Next slide. So what issues do these workers face and what do they look for from their union representation, right? Not all of these are kind of typical jobs. So there's sort of a big distinction between full-time year-round versus game day employees. For the full-time year-round employees, that's generally your building maintenance, your office cleaners. They're there every day. They're there year-round. It doesn't matter if they're, if the team is playing or not. The work that they do is kind of general maintenance of the facility. So their issues are the general bread and butter issues that you see, when we go into negotiations: pay, healthcare, retirement, paid time off, a lot of other issues like that. And then the game day employees, this is where it gets a little tricky, and some people might, kind of snicker a little bit at some of the things that we have in certain of our contracts. But, the truth is, as union representatives, we take what our members want seriously. And sometimes what they want isn't what we're sort of used to seeing in labor contracts. So the money is still there, but it's less of an issue. Most ushers, especially ushers and ticket takers, a lot of them are retirees. They're teachers off for the summer, and other people who are generally happy just to be at the ballpark. There's a lot of students who work there. And so issues like merchandise discounts, better parking, and free tickets are as important as money in a lot of situations. And they're also, for example, very picky about which section in the stadium they work at. So seniority-based bidding is also really crucial. And this is really when it kind of gets into that idea of passion, labor exploitation. The people who work these stadium jobs really do love being there. They love being there for the games. They love the atmosphere and their coworkers. They love interacting with the fans. And that's definitely very definitely taken advantage of by management, which we'll see in the next couple of slides here. So I wanted to do a quick case study, the Guardians versus the Tigers. And this isn't me slamming other teams because I am a huge Guardians fan, which I am, but just in my own experience, this is something sort of that we kind of experienced in the last 6 months or so. So both of our collective bargaining agreements, or CBAs, a fancy word for contracts for those who aren't familiar with it, expired at the end of 2021. But this is what the pay rates were. This is sort of simplified. Both stadium, like the Cleveland Guardians, for example, has 2 separate contracts, one for maintenance and custodial, one for ushers and ticket takers and security. And then the Detroit Tigers just has 1 contract, but it covers a much wider variety of employees. So I kind of went and looked at like what we could actually compare, what job classifications were actually in both CBAs, more or less, and where they were at. So at the end of 2021, before the expiration of their contracts, you could see a typical usher with the Cleveland Guardians would be making $12.10 an hour. With the Detroit Tigers, $9.87. Why $9.87? Why isn't it a round number? Usually contracts have kind of round numbers. It's because $9.87 at the end of 2021 was minimum wage in Detroit, minimum wage in Michigan. So it was actually written into the contract that a starting usher for the Detroit Tigers was making minimum wage. And that was something that they fought tooth and nail on keeping in the last negotiations in 2018. So safety personnel in Cleveland were making $13.30, $12 an hour with the Tigers. Game day cleaners in Cleveland were making $14.50 versus $10.25 with the Tigers. And maintenance employees are making $33 an hour in Cleveland versus $16 an hour in Detroit. So huge differences, really huge differences. So why is that? Let's go into the next slide here. So again, no professional sports teams are particularly good. I'm not talking about the teams themselves, but the owners. But there are varying shades of evil. So the Guardians, the owners are generally like the Dolans, who were mentioned earlier, billionaire family. They're generally disinterested in labor relations, which is sort of the best thing you can hope for in this kind of thing. With the Tigers, the Ilitch family, famously, probably most famous for owning Little Caesars Pizza. I don't recommend buying from them. I mean, it's gross pizza anyway, but specifically don't support the Ilitches with your money. But their owners are overly interested in labor relations. I know Chris Ilitch and the management of the Detroit Tigers had a huge impact on the 2022 MLB lockout. So management for the Guardians, the management sees their service workers as a value add for fans. They really think, having happy ushers, having happy ticket takers, having, well-respected cleanup crews it's going to be a good thing for the fans. The vice president of ballpark operations for a very long time was a former union member. So he kind of understood where they were coming from. So, and the Tigers, management takes sort of a different approach. They see its service workers purely as an expense. So this results with the Guardians as the team management really does, I have to say, treat them well, shows them a lot of respect in negotiations, the process of negotiations. They really take the time and meet and talk with the workers, but also in their paychecks. And the Tigers, as a result of their kind of view of their service employees being a pure cost, they really, all they try and do is reduce cost. They treat their workers horribly and pay them even worse. So the new contract, for example, with the Guardians, it took about 6 hours to negotiate. I mean, really, it was a few calls over Zoom with myself, our bargaining committee of a few ushers, security officers, and other folks were on there, and we got it done in about 6 hours. And it was a very easy process. And I can say historically, this is about my 4th contract that I've bargained with them. That's typically the case. The Tigers, it took 6 months. The MLBPA settled their contract months before we were able to in Detroit. So next page. So the bargaining results in Cleveland, pretty big differences, right? So we went from 1221 and looking at the final year of the CBA for an usher went from 1210 to 1550. Safety personnel also went up to 1550. The game day cleaners will soon be making 1585. And maintenance workers is going from 33 to 35. And we actually bargained that maintenance agreement a couple of years ago, and they were at 31. So they actually got $4 over the life of their agreement. So you can see these, this was bargained in a matter of a couple of hours over a couple of meetings. We got it done in like January, which is pretty typical for the seasonal work because you don't need to get it done. There's not a huge sense of urgency there. But again, I mean, when you have an employer who sort of looks at service employees as a value add, it makes a huge difference. Moving on to the next slide. So the top with the Tigers, and I included this. This was actually historical logo for the Tigers. I mean, most old timey baseball logos are kind of ridiculous, but this one particularly so. I don't know who allowed this to happen. But yeah, anyway, Tigers management premised their entire proposal package over and over again on the union agreeing to remove its security personnel from the bargaining unit. So they're basically asking us to bust our own union. So this is an extremely union busting tactic, and it's a permissive subject of bargaining, which for those of you who are in the know, I mean, this is pretty inside baseball. And again, pun very much intended. But yeah, it's a permissive subject of bargaining, meaning that they can't really make us bargain to impasse over it, but they're premising everything else on it. So the bargaining committee refused to the end, and despite lots of internal conflict, disparate backgrounds, expectations, and desire for negotiations, we had a lot of old ushers there who are in their 70s and even 80s who say, we don't really care that much. We just like being at the game. We want a couple extra bucks, whatever. But this really, they did stand together to the end, and they said, hell no, absolutely not. So finally, when we got to the end, management then regressed on all their proposals, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in wages and benefits off the table for our members in retaliation for that. Since we wouldn't bust our own union, they were like, well, we're not getting all the money we promised we were going to give you. So next slide. So defeating these paper tigers, which is what I've started calling them, the members took enormous initiative on their own. It's all about organizing, as we stated before. They called the local press, worked with the union to get the airtime on the local news about poverty wages. As a provocation and just sort of as a joke, when we were in negotiations, which was held at Tiger Stadium, I ordered Jets Pizza, which is like their biggest Detroit rival, thinking it was just kind of funny. And we got seriously yelled at by like security supervisors and management. They're this is such a thin-skinned organization that, our $50 pizza order for our bargaining committee got, serious note. Anyway, in the end, and this is me getting to a little socialist theory here, Marx's point about capitalism being its own gravedigger proved to be true. Management's viciousness towards its employees, a lot of whom, thought that they had a really good relationship with them. They'd been there for 25 plus years on the job. They love being at the game. But management, when they turned their ugly head towards our members, they organized the committee better than we ever could. And we determined that conditions required us to walk out of negotiations. So next slide. So our results here. Again, so the ushers who were being paid minimum wage are now going to between $14.21 and $16.21 an hour by the end of the CBA. Safety personnel going from $12 to $16.93 to $19.12. Game day cleaners going from $10.25 to between $15.84 and $17.84, and maintenance going from $16 to $21.85 to $22.95. So you can see the difference on that last column. It's huge. It's really an enormous amount of money that we won. And what ended up happening was after we walked out, we basically said like, fuck you at the table. We kind of marched out and I said, we had hours left for the day. we said, well, we're going back to the union hall to plan our next steps because you're being ridiculous. And they really thought that they were going to get like slammed in the press and like all this kind of stuff. And it turns out, well, I think we got lessons coming up in the next page here. So when you stand up to bullies, they often back down. This is something that we often take for granted. The capitalist structure is so built into us that we always think the boss is going to win. And the truth is, when workers organize, as we've seen before, time and time again, when you stand up to the boss collectively, you can win. The final settlement that we got from the Tigers, those huge boosts in money that we're talking about here, was exactly what our last proposal was. We said, here's our proposal. We're the hell out of here. Goodbye. They called us up a half hour. I was on my way back to Cleveland from Detroit. They said, turn around. We're going to have an agreement for you. And they gave us literally everything that we wanted. But also do your analysis and take advantage of external influences. I don't think that we would have been able to do this a couple of years ago. There's a lot of stuff going on right now that's really exciting for labor, including the labor shortage, inflation, and employers' aversion to bad press in this scenario. Be aware of your strengths and weaknesses and adapt when those change. Our committee was totally fractured before management gave them a common enemy to rally against. So we were kind of slogging through negotiations with a lot of different expectations of what was going to happen. And then when management kind of threw the door, shut the door in our face, that really kind of made the committee stand in solidarity. And we as the union, I mean, I took advantage of that, certainly. So solidarity is absolutely necessary to achieve victory, but it can really be forced. This was something that was really, use another one, an unforced error here on the Tigers' part. So again, that's the end of my presentation. My name is Max Gerbach. I'm the Assistant Director of Collective Bargaining for SEIU Local 1. My email address is there in case anybody wants to email me about anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max. That was excellent. And I think that, it's easy for us to get discouraged when we are working so hard for things and then don't have victories. So it's wonderful to hear about hard work paying off and having some great victories for the workers in Detroit. So our final speaker is Sean Doolittle. You may have heard of him. DSA member, pitcher for the Washington Nationals, and 2019 World Series champion. Sean?
Hey, everybody. Am I good? You can see me? I just want to start by saying thank you for inviting me to be here. I really, really appreciate it. Max, I really appreciated Max shining a light on the stadium workers. I think as players, we've started to do a better job as a union thinking about the workers that help us, bring our game to the fans over the last couple of years. I think when the pandemic hit in 2020 and the season got shut down, we reflected that by we donated over $1 million to stadium workers that were out of work because of the pandemic. And we did the same thing again ahead of this season while we were locked out and the season was kind of in limbo. I'm proud to say I'm an honorary Unite Here Local 23 member. I've met with our workers multiple times at the ballpark at Nats Park. And they won a big increase in wages ahead of the season before 2022 started. So that was awesome to see, and it tracks with some of the wins that Max was able to help those workers get. I also want to say thank you to Simon. For you guys, it might have been the first time you've heard Simon talk, but I've been lucky enough to talk with him quite a bit over the last couple of years, starting again during the pandemic when teams were not paying minor league players, and that really kicked their organizing into overdrive. And listening to Simon talk, seeing what More Than Baseball is doing, seeing what Advocates for Minor Leaguers is doing, which is another group that they work very closely together. The infrastructure, the communication, their organizing is really inspiring to see. And I think the ultimate goal for both sides really would be to help have the Players Association, the Major League Baseball Players Association, help minor leaguers get representation. And I think there's still some uncertain things to work through. What's that going to look like? Is that a sister union? Is that a sub union? We don't really know. That hasn't quite come into focus yet, but the attitudes amongst current major leaguers and their support for minor leaguers is shifting, and it's shifting pretty rapidly, because one of the reasons is because the major league level, the players, they're getting younger, and they come into the major leagues and they're fresh off of being super exploited at the minor league level, and having to cope with a lot of, like Simon said, the working conditions, the housing, which has gotten better, but there's still work to be done there. The travel, the pay, being shuffled up and down the ladder multiple times a season, going from different city to different city within your organization, and just kind of the uncertainty that comes along with it. So players have that fresh in their mind when they get to the big leagues, and then they have to realize, they get to the big leagues, they're on a wage scale, they're on a pay scale, and they really can't start making any increases or the big bucks until they have 3 full years of service time. So they have to wait a little bit more. And I think, players are just getting fed up. It used to be viewed amongst Major League Baseball players. The minor leagues used to be viewed as a rite of passage. It was a little bit romanticized. You talk with your teammates about the long bus rides and how much of a grind it was, and the stadiums that you played in, and how dingy and gross the clubhouses might have been, or how bad that hotel was that we had to stay in that one time, or remember when the bus broke down, like all of these things. But I think, the more players have started talking about it more, as our game gets younger, these guys are coming up, and guys it's not viewed like that as much anymore. Players are at the big league level are starting to advocate more on behalf of minor leaguers. We saw that a lot during the pandemic season of 2020, where multiple Major League Baseball players stepped up and donated large amounts of money. Adam Wainwright from the Cardinals, David Price from the Dodgers, the Nationals. We got together as a team, pooled our money, and with More Than Baseball's help, we were able to distribute it to our minor leaguers. Guys are realizing that the exploitation, it has gone entirely too far, especially in light of how the game has grown, about how MLB revenues have grown up to $10.7 billion in 2019. And yes, they did take a little bit of a hit during the pandemic season of 2020, but they're set to top $11 billion this year. That's going to be a recurring theme. Keep that $11 billion in the back of your head as we continue to have some of these conversations. I want to go back and I want to kind of lay the groundwork for how we got locked out, basically. So our collective bargaining agreement was set to expire December 1st, 2021 at midnight. And for 4 days leading up to that, Players Association, we had player members and player representatives in Dallas, Texas to meet with Major League Baseball. We had been negotiating since April. It wasn't always in the media. It wasn't always public. Most of the time, I think all of the time, the developments in the negotiations that were public were strategic leaks by Major League Baseball. They were geared to gauge public sentiment. They were geared to maybe scare some players and try to divide our membership. So we were there for 4 days ahead of the expiration in December. Negotiations were very slow and frustrating at that point. That's usually a time, that 4-day window when we meet with Major League Baseball ahead of the expiration of the collective bargaining agreement, is when we're almost at the finish line, and we're using those last 4 days to kind of push it, into the end zone and walk out of there with a new agreement, which would allow the off season to resume as normal. Player acquisitions, free agent signings, trades, roster construction, stuff like that. Everybody can start looking forward to baseball again next season, but it was clear that they weren't really there to negotiate. They were stalling. They were very combative in the room. And the last day was Thursday, and we were scheduled to meet with them all the way up until midnight. And they came to us at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and said they had sent their owners home. Negotiations were over. The final straw, as they viewed it, was because at that point in time, we had not agreed to, they wanted to cut our pensions. And that's been a recurring theme for Major League Baseball and some of our previous work stoppages. They've continuously come after our pensions. They were going to cut our pensions, and we had to agree to the cuts in our pensions just in order to see their proposal, their economic proposal. And we said no. We weren't going to agree to a cut in our pension. The pensions are one of the most sacred things that we have as not as workers, but as Major League Baseball players, but especially also as workers. I was very proud to reach 10 years of Major League service time last week. So I have a full pension waiting for me when I'm done, which I'm very proud of. But enough about me. Pensions, let's see. I have some notes here. We struck over pensions in 72. That was probably the biggest one. But pensions, we struck over pensions in 1985. It was only a 2-day strike, but it was probably one of the most important strikes that we went on in the history of our sport and our union. So them coming after our pensions is always going to be a non-starter. We think they knew that, but they wanted to be able to paint us as the bad guys for not agreeing to their proposal. And to one of Alyssa's points at the top, she mentioned how Major League Baseball has almost always moved to institute a lockout right when the CBA expires. They don't want, like most management, they don't want workers to have the power of organizing and setting a strike date. They didn't want to give us that leverage. They wanted to try to control as much of the timeline as they possibly could. So it expired, lockout was instituted, and negotiations basically stopped for the next 6 weeks. They did not reach out and contact us, and we did not reach out and contact them. To be fair, we did not reach out and contact them because we had the last economic proposal on the table. They never made their last one that they were threatening to make. So the ball, as far as we were concerned, was in their court. We had been preparing for this fight for the last 5 years. Our CBAs, our collective bargaining agreements, they all last 5 years. And over the course of those 5 years, we as players, we voted to withhold a portion of our licensing checks. So our licensing checks, that is money that comes from anytime our name, image, or likeness is used. It could be a video game, it could be a jersey sale, it could be baseball cards, anything like that. It can be commercials, national ad campaigns, all kinds of those financial opportunities. They all get thrown into a pot, and each player gets an even slice of that pie. And we withhold over the 5 years leading up to an agreement, we withhold more and more each year. So we actually get a smaller and smaller check each year, but that money that we withhold goes into the union's war chest. And through that, we're able to continue to fund our union and our lawyers and our representatives that work for us at the union. They also fund our healthcare. And, with that, we're able to start to provide some funding for players that might need it without a check coming in. And I think a lot of people are going to be like, well, how come players need financial help? And, aren't you guys all millionaires? Alyssa alluded to this at the top, and she mentioned that the average salary was $4.4 million. I think it's important to also note that the average median salary. So if you lined up from 0 to the highest paid player in the league, the middle number is 1.15 million. 65% of our players don't make $1 million. The average career is getting shorter and shorter. I think if you look online, you'll see a lot of that suggests the average career is 5 to 6 years. That's not entirely accurate based on everything that we have. That's 5 or 6 seasons. Everything in baseball when it comes to us as players is done by service time. Every day that you're in the league, 172 days rounds up to a full year. It's actually closer to 4 years of service time is the average. So we have 65% of our guys making less than $1 million. 35% of our guys are making $600,000 or less. This was at the beginning of 2021. So we don't have full data from the new CBA in 2022 yet. The new league minimum salary is $700,000. That was one of the wins we got in our most recent bargaining session. But heading into 2021, we had 902 players on opening day rosters, and 65% of those were making less than $1 million. That's out of 1,200 players. For context, Manfred makes $11 million a year. One thing that we've seen happen in Major League Baseball, and this is one of the contentious issues of the collective bargaining agreement, is the growing disparity in player pay. Player pay, yeah, I said that right. That's a little bit of a tongue twister. Average salaries have dropped 5% under the last CBA. So from 2017 to 2021, average salaries dropped 5%. It's important to note that during that time, league revenues rose to $10.7 billion. And if you up until the pandemic season, there were 17 consecutive years of record revenue growth for Major League Baseball. So at a time from, in the 17 years leading up to that, we're seeing record revenue growth. Average player salaries are declining and careers are getting shorter. I mentioned the league is set to top $11 billion in 2022. But when you look at talking about the disparity in pay, MLB almost has two classes of players. You have the young guys that I mentioned, 65% of our league that are making less than $1 million. The 100 highest paid players in the league, their salary accounts for over 50% of salaries, 52.4% of salaries. So the top 100 guys in the league, they're getting more than half of the salaries. And that's a 10% increase since 2017. So that's happened pretty quickly. And it's been pretty dramatic. And now as amongst players, MLB is banking on that to try and divide us, right? To have the young guys maybe be willing to take a deal that is maybe not entirely fair for us, just to get the season started, just so we don't miss any paychecks. But As players, the way that we see it is that those 100 highest paid players that are making, the lion's share of our pie, they're the ones that are actually getting paid represent in commensurate to their value. They're the ones that are being compensated fairly. And I know this is weird to say because we were just talking about stadium workers, making $30 an hour, and Simon was talking about minor leaguers that make less than $10,000 a year. Players as the front-facing product in an $11 billion a year industry deserve to be compensated according to the value that they're bringing to their clubs on and off the field. For a long time, there was a model in baseball, pay model called the WAR model, where WAR is an acronym, WAR. It's an acronym that stands for wins above replacement, and it generally targets a player's value compared to what the league average player would be. And so the best players in our league are averaging 8 to 10 WAR per year. There was a model for a few years, maybe from like 2015 to 2018, where for every WAR a player got, one WAR was worth roughly $6 million. And it worked for a little bit. Teams were using that because they want to take as much negotiation out of it. Teams were using it in an unofficial capacity to try and evaluate talent and attach a price tag to certain kinds of players. But they quickly realized that was costing them too much money. And so they've gotten away from that in recent years. And what has ended up happening is this system, as it's set up right now, it works for the best players in the league. The household names, the guys that are your favorite teams. I've seen a lot of teams in the chat represented here tonight, but the system's working for those guys. They're making money. They're making a lot of money. But it is in line with the value that they're bringing to their team, driving league revenues up to $11 billion. The guys that it's really affecting are the young guys that haven't quite established themselves in the league yet, and the middle class of players. And what I refer to the middle class as is it's guys who are in the seasons that are after they go through salary arbitration. So 7 through 10, 11, 12 years of service time in the league. Maybe they are a little bit past their prime, but they still have value to bring to clubs. And these are the guys that teams are saying, well, it's not really worth it for us to pay this guy. We should be paying him $5 million. It's not really worth it for us to pay this guy that much money when we can bring up, and kind of rotate through maybe 3 or 4 or 5 guys from the minor leagues, pay them the league minimum. And hopefully 1 or 2 of them, it'll work out for us and we'll be able to make up that cost difference. It'll be more cost effective for us. We might not get the same production at the end of the year. We might, but we also might not, but we're also going to save $3 to $4 million by not having to pay this veteran guy who's a free agent. So it's driving those guys out of the game earlier. It's driving their salaries down. And it's creating a class of player. That's how you get guys. That's how you get 65% of your league making less than $1 million. That's how you get 35% of your league making, league minimum. The way that our salaries are structured, you don't get to negotiate any sort of pay increase until you have 3 full years of service time in Major League Baseball. Then you go through a salary arbitration process where it's a monopsony. You negotiate with your team for a pay raise. And it's important to know that that's 3 years of service time. It might take guys 3, 4, 5 seasons, parts of 3 or 4 or 5 seasons to be able to reach that and get a chance to go in front of your team and negotiate for an increase in pay. You do that for your next 3 years. So the team really has control of you. They have all the rights to your salary. You can only negotiate with your team for the first 6 years of your career, after which you become a free agent, thanks to Kurt Flood. And then you can start negotiating for yourself a little bit more. But the way the game is going, and teams being reluctant to pay for veteran players, middle-class players, players get shuffled up and down from the minor leagues quite a bit for the first 2 years of their career, once they get to the major leagues. So that was another thing we were looking to do in this collective bargaining agreement, was stop that service time manipulation. Have the players be able to come up to the big leagues when they're ready and stay there. Let them start working on accumulating service time so that they can start working towards a pay raise that will actually reflect the value that they're bringing to their team. The one thing that, probably the biggest thing that we worked on for the new collective bargaining agreement was the competitive balance tax. It was called the luxury tax when it was implemented in 1997. It was rebranded as the collective bargaining threshold in 2003. When it came back, the idea behind it was to create a compromise. Our players went on strike during 1994 and 1995 over a salary cap. We're the only sports league without one. We've always believed that a player should be able to make as much money as they can possibly get. And this collective balance threshold was set as a way to compromise with owners and avoid, more work stoppages. And the issue that we ran into during the previous collective bargaining agreement that expired in 2021 was it has not risen in proportion to the way the league has grown, in proportion to the way player payroll has increased. So it has, in the last 10 years or so, it has really started to act like a de facto salary cap. It used to be considered a soft cap, but it's not really that soft anymore. To give you guys an idea, we mentioned that, league revenues we've seen consecutive years of record growth. That comes down to roughly $350 million a team. When the CBT was initially implemented, it was back in 2003. In 2003, the average payroll for each team was roughly $60 million. The CBT was set at $110 million. Back then, league revenues were $125 million. Fast forward, so you have the CBT pretty close to league revenue. 110, the CBT is 110, that luxury tax is 110 compared to $125 million of revenues. In 2019, the CBT had risen to $204 million. Revenues had skyrocketed to $350 million. So I don't have a chart, but revenues are going like this, very steep. CBT had leveled off. It had not grown commensurate to the league, and teams began to use it like a de facto salary cap. That was the thing. That is the reason why you're seeing teams pay the big bucks for top talent, for household names and the superstars, and then teams, their excuse is that they have to round out their roster now with the cheapest available talent, which is what? Young guys that are still making the league minimum, that still haven't gone through that arbitration process, and maybe veteran guys on the back end of their career that they can really drive their price tag down because not a lot of teams are paying for those guys anymore. Those are the guys that are getting squeezed out of the league, but they want to play another few years, and they are willing to take a little bit less money. They have to take a little bit less money if they're going to stay in the league. So the CBT was another, that was another main issue, leading us towards a lockout. We were trying to raise it. We had proposed to raise it from 205 million up to 245 at one point. If you tracked inflation and revenue growth of the league, the CBT should have been at $297 million after 2021. Again, we were at 206. Yeah, we were at 206. This is after 2019. Sorry, this was pre-pandemic. 200. If it had risen commensurate with inflation and league revenues, it would have grown to 297 million, and then teams would have been able to spend up until that before they have to start paying a marginal tax. Instead, it was 206. So we had proposed to raise it to 245. We settled at 230. So we did get a significant increase there. We got a significant increase to league minimum salary. We were able to get some protections for the younger guys being able to start accruing service time earlier in their career. We were able to protect our pension and get the growth, get the inflation factored into our pension and continue to have those fully funded. We are still working on MLB. There's still an issue outstanding regarding the international draft, players from Latin America and from Japan and Taiwan. What's the best way to bring those guys into the league? A draft is inherently anti-labor, and right now, players from those countries are saying a draft isn't the right way to go. But the reality is that there are a lot of ways that teams are exploiting the current system and signing players to handshake deals as young as 12, 13 years old. Those deals are not binding. Those deals, oftentimes a lot of the salary doesn't end up going directly to the player when they get that big signing bonus when they turn 16. It goes to in Latin America, they have what are called buscones who help these kids. They almost act as agents, and they help these kids get exposure, but sometimes they end up taking a large portion of their signing bonus as pay for what they did for them by getting exposure. So we're deferring to our brothers from Latin America and from overseas to try to work with Major League Baseball to figure out a better way to work on getting these players an opportunity to play professional baseball and hopefully one day make it to the major leagues. And one of the other biggest changes that we saw coming out of this bargaining agreement was an expanded playoff to 12 teams. It had been 10 teams made the playoffs. Now 12 teams will make the playoffs, 6 teams in each league. The format will be very different. It's something players have been very nervous about. And at first you're like, why would you guys not want more of an opportunity to make the World Series? We all love playoff baseball, but the biggest thing we're concerned about is if you expand the playoff pool, do you disincentivize competition in the regular season? Do you disincentivize teams from paying to sign the best players in the league during the offseason? Do you basically incentivize mediocrity? A team that is 500 that wins, goes 82 and 82, now is pretty much in the thick of the playoff. 81 and 81 would be 500. That team is very much in the playoff race right now. Typically, it takes around 90 wins to get to the major leagues, which doesn't sound like much, but over the course of a 162 game season, our thought has always been as players that the cream rises to the top. That's a long enough season that when the playoffs come around, you know for sure that after every team has fought through injuries, has gone on hot streaks and cold spells, you know for a fact that you're getting the best 10 teams in the league are going to go duke it out in the playoffs. Now 12 teams, you start to expand that a little bit, and does it water down the regular season? Does it, incentivize teams to just be okay and maybe make a playoff push even though they're not a 500 team? Does it, teams are going to be more reluctant to spend in free agency because they might say it's not worth it to us to sign that guy. We think we're, roughly a 500 team right now. So it's another way that MLB may have just shrunk the market for free agent players. I mentioned the playoffs, and the one thing that the biggest reason MLB wanted expanded playoffs was money. Most teams during the season, they actually do, from everything that we have been able to gather, they break even or maybe even lose money over the course of the regular season, but they make so much money during the playoffs. That's where they go from red to black, essentially. The TV deals that they have lined up for the national broadcasts in the playoffs are so high that once the teams are done revenue sharing and splitting up those gains, they're able to spread it around, and it makes teams in the end much more profitable. So to give you guys an idea of some of these TV deals, these numbers include the broadcasting rights for playoffs as well as the regular season. But this is where a lot of the growth comes from. We talked about that $11 billion number that MLB is set to hit this year. This is where a lot of it comes from. TV deals, national ad sponsorships, streaming online. It doesn't really come from gate revenue. That's kind of like a cherry on top when it comes to teams' bottom line. To give you an idea, Fox Sports just signed a new 7-year deal worth $5.1 billion. Turner Sports in Major League Baseball agreed to a 7-year deal worth $3.75 billion. ESPN's 7-year deal is worth $4 billion. Apple TV's deal is worth $595 million. They have a 2-year deal with Peacock for $60 million. And not a TV deal, but their new deal with Nike is worth $1 billion. Nike's doing all of our uniforms now. So Nike has that. And that's before starting next year, teams will be allowed to put advertising on their uniforms, and that'll net around $250 million. So players have not been getting a share of these profits at the major league level or the minor league level. Workers haven't been getting a fair share of these profits either, but we were asked to subsidize the losses in 2020 when the pandemic hit and we weren't paid our full salary. So I'm going to stick around. I'll answer any questions that anybody has. I know that was kind of long and I didn't have any slides. So if you guys have questions, I'm more than willing to answer them. I want to say thank you again to Max and Simon for their awesome presentation and for letting me hang out with you guys tonight. It was really cool to talk labor and baseball.
Thank you so much. This has been super great and really appreciate you being here. I'm going to drop again some links in the chat for everyone. So this first link here is the most important because it actually contains all the other links too. One of the things that we're asking you to do is to sign Simon's More Than Baseball petition supporting the minor league players. And we're also asking you to email your senators. As Sean is telling us, and as we all know, billionaires suck. We hate them. We are fighting like the biggest bosses of all when we are fighting them. I really, really appreciate all of the speakers emphasizing how important solidarity is. And I do want you to feel rest assured. We'll stay on here a minute to answer some questions because we have a lot of them. But one of the things that we're going to ask you to do is, if you take your chapter to a baseball game, of course, be super respectful of the stadium workers and the players. You can follow some of our tips to make that experience go smoothly. We're all baseball fans here. We're super excited to be there. This is a great picture of Akron DSA at a baseball game. We're going back at the end of the month. Really looking forward to it. Go Ducks again. And now I am going to hand it over to Alyssa to help us with facilitating the question and answer section. But I just want you to know you'll be getting all this information in emails from me again. And also you should organize your own workplace if you are inspired by the wins of some of these organizing workers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you to all of our speakers. This has been quite honestly like one of the best DSA events that I've been on, both as a participant and as a facilitator. It's been extremely informative, but also just really fun. And I think that it's good to have fun things. We do some hard work, so we should have fun occasionally as well. All right, so I'll move on to the questions here. Now, these aren't necessarily directed at specific people, so some of them I might just kind of pick who I think might answer them best. Let's see. I'll start off with this one. When MLB and MLBPA are in negotiations or a dispute, what are effective ways fans and fan organizations can show their support for the players? Sean, do you want to take that one? I think that probably makes the most sense.
Am I good? I'm unmuted, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I think the biggest way right now that we've seen is we really started to see a different kind of it almost felt a little bit like grassroots, which feels weird to say when you're talking about Major League Baseball players. But what the fans' involvement on social media around the negotiations was very different this offseason in 2021 into 2022 than it was in my first negotiation, which was after the 2016 season. Fans have started to become more fed up with the way that owners are refusing to go over the competitive balance threshold, the way that they're claiming to be losing money every year, even despite the skyrocketing revenues and stuff like that. They want their teams to go out and sign the best players. They want to have a chance at competing for a World Series. The fans don't want to have to go through a rebuild and watch their team suffer for 5 to 7 to 9 years where they're not competitive. On opening day, they're not going to be competitive. So why, as a fan, am I giving my money to this team? I'm paying for tickets, I'm paying for jerseys, I'm paying for parking, I'm paying for a subscription to stream the games online. I'm stuff like that. Why am I paying for the regional sports network to be a part of my TV package? So I think what we started to see was pushback from fans, and fans either taking the player's side or taking an anti-MLB stance. Calling for a way to change the structure to allow more teams to be competitive on a yearly basis. I think if you go into the season, there might honestly objectively be, 12, 15 teams at the beginning of the season that look like World Series contenders. And then over the course of the season, as stuff starts to shake out and you really see there might only be like 5 or 7. I think our sport would be better if there were 20 teams going for it every year. Realistically, like, stuff's going to go in cycles and there's going to be down years, but fans putting pressure on their team, whether it's on social media or with their wallet, I think those are the most effective ways.
Excellent. So probably some things that we're definitely already doing. I know I dropped in the chat. I have a lot of feelings about, I mostly listen on the radio, but also because the Guardians have just, fantastic announcers, and got to listen to Tom Hamilton. gripe about whatever he's griping about that day. Yesterday it was the changes at Camden, just for like 10 straight minutes about the wall, and just so mad. But it's wonderful. Yeah, I think so. Some things that we're probably already doing and other things that we could continue to do or enhance a little bit. All right. Let's see here. So this one for Simon. I think the More Than Baseball survey showed 77% of players saying their development needs are not met. I'm curious, what are a minor league player's development needs? Is this as basic as food, housing, and other basic needs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we didn't specify that, sort of up to players to answer that, but generally as a minor league player, you need to be able to train in the off season in particular. That's something that's totally not paid for by teams. That requires a weight room, that often requires renting a batting cage or a mound, time on a mound to go throw. If you're a pitcher, you have to usually find a catcher. Usually we end up paying high school kids in the off season to do that if you're not training at a facility. Some developmental needs during the season. We know sleep correlates with better performance on the field. Teams are emphasizing sleep, and yet they're sticking 2 players into a bedroom at 25 years old. Teams are, nutrition. That's been a big issue in the sport. We know players have to eat like athletes in order to perform like athletes. So you sort of see it all through the system and the player development structure, that teams are taking seriously the idea that they want to invest in player development, but not investing in the working conditions that allow for better player development. And salary, I think, is really important because teams don't normally see paying players better as creating better baseball players, but really investing in your athletes and paying them a living wage would in fact lead to better developmental outcomes. And that's part of what we were showing on the survey, is that players see their developmental needs are not met by salaries. That means they can't develop as Major League Baseball players with the salary structure the way they are. You can check out, we posted a link on our Twitter from a number of player quotes that we pulled, or it was a thread. I think it's pinned to our Twitter, but it shows a number of players referencing training as professional athletes is one of the most significant reasons they want a living wage. They want to be able to train and become the best baseball players they can be, and they can't do that currently. So yeah, that's sort of the developmental question, I think, as I see it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think there's so many expectations, but if there's not that support, like, how are you supposed to follow through with that kind of stuff? Let's see. So this one, I think, probably kind of makes sense for Max. How can we build cross-industry solidarity? Because I think that, we probably, a lot of us wouldn't even think of like the stadium workers and, how much work they're putting in to make sure that our experience when we're at the park is flawless and enjoyable.
That's a really interesting question. And I don't know. I mean, I think this is, a question for creative people to work on. And I'm happy to get together with others about that. I mean, we've had interesting suggestions from our own bargaining committees in various stadiums. For example, our shop steward for the ushers in Cleveland suggested that, like, just, one of the things they want to do is make themselves more visible, not just as ushers and security and tarp crew and whatever, but as workers at the stadium and as part of their union, and show their union pride. So a lot of times we will bargain into our contracts, like the ability to wear union pins or whatever into our CBAs. And then sort of, I think once that awareness is raised, then, anybody else who's in a union who is committed to their union, typically if they see somebody else who like wearing their union stuff, they'll say like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what do you do? And having those conversations is really important. So just the more visible you can be, I would say if you're part of a union and you don't work at a baseball stadium, whatever, but if you're going to a baseball stadium, wear your union stuff when you go, and talk to the workers that are there. I think that's, that's really important. I think that, I don't know what sort of relationship SEIU has or Unite Here has with the MLBPA, but I think that that's something that we, can and probably should look at going forward as well. Like, where can we collaborate, especially in years like this when our contracts expire at the same time, right? Because again, like a lockout, the MLB, again, they go into lockout mode much faster than any other sort of employer does that we deal with. And if the MLB or if the MLB is going to go into lockout mode, I mean, that affects our members, almost as much as the players, because, apart from the occasional like maintenance guy who needs to show up to fix something that management can't do on their own, all of our ushers, all of our game day staff, nobody works and they don't get paid. There's nothing for them there. And I know in the past, the MLB PA has, put up money, especially with COVID. That was like it was a profound gesture, I think. But yeah, I think that, more conversations should happen around the really like the nuts and bolts of bargaining and solidarity and what we can do together to kind of beat back these owners.
Yeah, I think that especially being able to have that visibility would kind of make it easier to, be able to show solidarity. Like I think about Heather's always got excellent SEIU gear. When we're going to events, like when we were up in Cleveland, supporting transit workers and things like that. And so I think it would be super cool. You know what I mean? If we're able to, I could maybe borrow some Big Perp gear from you and, show solidarity.
We got a lot of
folks.
t-shirts.
Awesome. I'd love to have one. All right. So the next question I want to put to Simon first, but then I also think would be, a question also with Sean, because I know just because people are in a union doesn't mean that they're active and interested and, understand the importance of being a part of some of that work, especially going through contract negotiations. So first to Simon, what are some of the challenges and barriers to having organizing conversations with fellow players?
Yeah, this is something that I've thought about pretty extensively. And really, one is fear. There's a huge amount of fear amongst minor league players. The turnover rate in minor league baseball is it's like 15% a year of players get released. So you're dealing with players whose lives are already on a razor's edge, players who have a lot to lose. Minor league baseball players are not often, some minor league players are from wealthy families. They sign for a lot of money. They're doing fine. Most minor league players are not from that background. They have a huge amount to lose if they lose their baseball career. They lose their only chance probably at being a multimillionaire. And players also, what I was saying earlier is that players believe they're going to make it. And so this fear plus this belief that you're going to make it leads to it's a paralyzing type of psychology that goes on in minor league baseball that we've worked to overcome in a lot of ways. And I think the only way really to overcome that is through collective action. Players are terrified to speak out alone, and rightly so. I know a number of players. One of our co-founders at More Than Baseball, Slade Heathcott, spoke out when he was playing. He was a first-round pick by the Yankees, spoke out when he was with the A's and got released like 2 days later. It was right after the Save America's Pastime Act came out. Players get blackballed all the time, whether it's known or not known, whether it's they file a suit or they don't, and they really never do because they're not going to win it. Players are terrified of losing their jobs. But the thing that we've found that's been really helpful is that, first of all, when you have players in sort of clearly anonymous settings, so players when they're filling out surveys and things like that, and they don't have to submit email addresses or names, they've been able to say things that they would never have said otherwise. In other sort of spaces, when we have a group of players often will open up when there's 15, 20, 30 players on a call. You'll hear things from guys that they would never tell you in a one-on-one conversation. Also, I think one of the other things is that when we talk about organizing amongst players, minor league players are generally a pretty conservative group of players. But if you talk about things like respect, things like sort of fair treatment, not necessarily like justice in those terms, but in terms of respect, in terms of dignity, in terms of sort of like your own value as a player and as a worker, players respond really well to those things. And so sort of generally in these conversations, it's creating a really safe environment for players to speak their minds, a collective environment, and then really focusing on the things that matter to players, which are respect and dignity. And I'm sure, Sean, when you've had conversations with your teammates, probably exactly the same stuff has been echoed in those.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense, and that's probably like fears that a lot of folks have in their workplace, talking about organizing, like you were saying, Max. Like this is the question, right? How do you talk about that stuff? Because we don't have protections, it's not many people are getting fired, and we're seeing that happen, all over the place, or a store shuts down, once Starbucks workers, are planning a vote, so this is something that's really relatable, I think, for the working class folks. Did you have something you wanted to add, Max?
Yeah, and I think this is very separate from minor league baseball, because that's really like, that is such a narrow path that you're on. But in the service industry right now, listen, all these conversations are hard all the time. However, we're in a really unique time in our economic history, where there is an enormous labor shortage that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So I have found that workers who in our sector who tend to be kind of quiet, these are janitors who work at night, don't really talk to people. They're really kind of stepping out and being like, what the fuck? Why aren't you paying me money? Like, how are you justifying this? And really, like, people who I never ever would have thought would have stepped up to say these kind of things are really like taking a major role. I mean, we're seeing strike action, we're seeing concerted labor activity on a level we haven't seen in quite a long time in this country, because it's not only about money, it's about forced overtime, it's about all this kind of stuff that relates to the fact that there is just less labor, and we got to leverage that power when we can. Again, minor league baseball is because it's so small, I mean, and it is on such a narrow path that doesn't, I don't know how much it applies to that, but in general, in labor, now is a time to really kind of take advantage of these external situations, these material conditions that are surrounding us, and encourage boldness, where sometimes we tend to kind of pull back. Now's the time to do that.
Absolutely. Sean, what have your experience has been kind of talking to your fellow players about being in the union, and like what that means, and being a part of negotiations?
It's really fascinating to echo what Simon said. Baseball is a pretty conservative space, and like the word socialism is absolutely a buzzword in the clubhouse. But like our solidarity has absolutely been it's been our strongest asset for us over the last couple of years, leading up to our CBA negotiations that we just went through, and the lockout and everything like that. And we did have a little bit of a test run in 2020, because we had to renegotiate the terms that we were going to resume the season under during the pandemic year. So 2020, we did get to work out some of the kinks and stuff like that. But the biggest thing to me, to get players involved has been the communication and the infrastructure that we have to communicate. We have an app on excuse me, on all of our phones. And in addition to having information about our pensions and about player salaries and about our healthcare and our benefits, it also has a message function. So if there's an issue, players can reach out to someone that works at our union in New York, or they can start a conversation by talking to another player on a different team that maybe they don't know. Baseball is a small world, but there's still some guys that you don't have their contact info yet. And you can start having conversation about that. Guys from different teams talking about these and sharing different perspectives. But really just, talking to your teammates. I was a player up for 8 years. And then once I became a free agent and went to a new team, I was an alternate, and I'm an alternate on this team as well. But so each team has a team rep. We have one guy that really is like the head guy, but they also have 2 or 3 alternates who are usually very, very well informed. And, having the ability to communicate we usually don't do text. We either do WhatsApp or we use the app to talk. It's encrypted, and who knows what's going to get back to MLB. But that would be my biggest thing is the communication. That way, if there are people that are on the fence, they can hash it out. They can voice their concerns, which a lot of times are valid and it's fair. But I think they start to realize that there's strength in numbers. There's strength in sticking with the rest of your teammates. If you're a minor leaguer, there's strength in standing with groups like More Than Baseball and advocates. And if you're in a union, like that's where the strength comes from, is having everybody on the same page. And yeah, I might take a hit here in the short term, but long term, our strength really resides in our numbers and our unity. So cultivating that by having better communication, I think we've found has been really important.
Yeah, I think that that's been something I've learned, not from being in like labor specifically, but mostly from Heather, because I've learned everything I know about labor from Heather. Talking to people is super important. And, you know, once you start just having conversations with people, it's easier for us to realize that we have a lot more in common than we don't. And that's kind of been the main thing that I've taken away, that I've learned from Heather specific to labor, but also, you know, just in DSA in the past couple of years since I've been involved locally with my chapter. All right, let's see here. Sorry, I'm looking through the list. There's so many questions. Let's see here. This is, I think, a good one too. Related to the baseball offensive environment question, can we stand in solidarity with the Rawlings workers in Costa Rica who make the baseballs and who are constantly being blamed by the league for various issues when that control is MLB's responsibility? Who wants to take that one? It's a very specific one. Go ahead, Sean.
That's actually a really good question. Whoever asked that, thank you for asking that. I do want to make it clear that the variance in the way the baseball has been playing is not the fault of the workers in Costa Rica. It is MLB is giving them the specs that they want the baseball to be. And then the workers, yeah, they're making the baseball to those specs, but the variance in the baseball is not because of any sort of worker, just them not being good at their jobs or anything like that. I think we don't have an issue with the quality of the baseball. We have an issue with MLB changing the specs on the baseball, and that comes from New York. They claim that they're trying to get it right, and I don't know what's worse, that they can't get it right, that they can't figure it out, or that they're doing this on purpose. And so I just wanted to clear that up. As far as solidarity, I honestly don't know. Like Max said before, I'm very open to creative ways to try and do that. We had a similar issue with the New Era workers in Derby, New York, a couple years ago. New Era used to make all the on-field caps that players wore for their uniforms at a garment factory in Derby, New York, upstate New York, near Buffalo. And they closed that factory, and hundreds of members lost their jobs. They shipped the work to a non-union factory in Florida. And so that was I ran my mouth about that, and that's what got me an honorary membership into Unite 23. So it's impossible to say if it was bad or not, but MLB was not happy with me. But I think that's what it's going to take is, people speaking out. And I actually don't even know that much about the working conditions in Costa Rica. So that would be something to look into as well, and maybe start there, and then we can start something to support them.
Yeah, I think that and it was also brought up earlier too about, the way that baseball is dependent upon, essentially, sounds like human trafficking in, Latin America. And so I think there's a lot of things that we could dive deeper into that have kind of been brought to light in this conversation. I think probably a lot of folks really hadn't thought about. But is, super important to baseball and kind of how does it continue to operate. Let's see here. So is there ever a future for municipal ownership of MLB teams? We put so much money into building the stadiums. Why shouldn't we benefit from the teams? Okay. Everybody had a reaction to that one. Who wants to start?
I mean, I could start right there. I would say under current conditions, absolutely not. There's no future for that. I mean, there's the way our political and economic system is structured. There's absolutely no way. I mean, it's all about wealth consolidation and then using that for power consolidation. So these owners are making record amounts of money. They're hoarding that wealth, and they're using that to pay, what seems like a huge amount of money, but is really small dividends for them, to local politicians and people who make decisions about, tax incentives and, turning on the tax, the tax faucet, turning it on and off. And Cleveland, there's sort of a great example. I mean, we were about to, and I think it was for First Energy Stadium where the Browns play, they were about to, spend millions and an obscene amount of money for a city where most people live in poverty, to pay for upgrades to the stadium. And people were like, wait, why aren't the Haslams paying for this? They own it. They make a shitload of money off of it. Like, why aren't they paying for this? And then of course the threat is always, well, we'll just leave. And coming from Cleveland, where we've seen the Browns leave before, like that's a threat that people have made good on before. And people are, it's such a, I don't know, it's such a bullying tactic, but it's one that you can't really do much about. I mean, there was a genuinely a very good petition that was put together. It was going to be on the ballot, whether or not people approved of this, spending taxpayer dollars on this upgrade. But then the right people, got the right amount of money. And I'm talking about the Greater Cleveland, what's it called? Greater Cleveland congregations. They were a big part of it. But they wanted money for drug rehabilitation. They got that from the city. And then when they did, they pulled all of their petitions and made it ineligible to become on the ballot. They did it on like the day before the signatures were due. So there's all, I would say no. I would love to see that, but no.
I appreciate your honesty, though, at least, with what the current situation is. I didn't know if anybody else had wanted to speak to that, since it was there was such a reaction to it, because we've got plenty of other questions too. So I'm fine with either.
No, I mean, I would love to. I'm with Max, I guess. Like, that's the dream, right? But it just feels like it's so ingrained in the way that the structure is not going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately. But hey, it might only take one. It might only take one team. And MLB now, with the consolidation of the minor leagues, they also have summer league teams, college summer league teams under the umbrella now. So they have such a monopoly on baseball, professional baseball, and the highest levels in the United States. It makes it really tough we've seen with football and with basketball, there have been spin-off leagues that have worked to varying degrees. You see, there's some spin-off leagues like the Big Three, the 3-on-3 for basketball, that's on ESPN. Like their football has spin-off leagues. I don't even know what they're called anymore. They keep changing the name. The USFL, I think, or the American Football League. Like, that's nationally televised as well. Like, baseball, there's no way to do that because of the way the antitrust exemption is set up right now. So that would I think, in my very moderately formed opinion, would have to be the first domino to fall if we're going to start chipping away at that.
MLB also made an attempt to buy Perfect Game, which is the largest youth baseball organization, travel ball organization in the country. And they have this, Manfred's idea here is, he calls it one baseball. He wants to basically own everything under the umbrella of MLB and have this sort of, it's a monopoly, but it's like a hyper, both vertical and horizontally integrated monopoly of the industry. And it's totally legal, thanks to the antitrust exemption.
Wow, that's something. Rob Manfred. Well, we're still enjoying ourselves, so let's not talk about Rob. Let's see. So, yeah, child labor-based monopoly. Yeah. Ugh. So kind of getting to some of the policy stuff, and we had talked about some of those things before. Obviously we sent out the Save Baseball Act letter campaign and things. So someone had asked, is it the case that the PRO Act or some other way of rolling back Taft-Hartley would help a lot with these issues that y'all are facing? So I don't know who wants to take that because it's kind of an all-encompassing, I guess. I mean, Max, you're the you're the union person specifically, not saying other folks here aren't union, but
yeah. No, I don't see how rolling back Taft. I mean, there's a lot of bad shit in Taft-Hartley, but I don't see how rolling it back would help out in these kind of situations. I think that the more pointed thing that we could do is remove this exemption on the on monopoly, anti-monopoly law, right? Antitrust stuff. I mean, I think that would hit home a lot harder than rolling, anything you could roll back in Taft-Hartley is going to be pretty tertiary to how things are just set up. I mean, it's so ingrained right now that I don't think that there would be any significant, huge changes. But that's just my thought.
On the minor league side, it's not really a legal question of whether players are allowed to organize, but rather an organizing question of whether it's doable and feasible right now to organize players, and whether we can get a union election or sort of general enough support in the sport to create a union. I don't think it's a policy question on that front.
that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so probably can do two more. I'm thinking we're thinking about ending it around 9 o'clock, so maybe one, maybe two. So one that I think is super important, and definitely can go for all of the panelists here, but something we've probably all experienced at work. How do you combat that attitude of I suffered through this and you should too? Yeah. So I don't know.
I'll give it a shot first.
Yeah.
Because this is definitely something that we see with major leaguers that have made it. They got through the minor leagues one way or another, and like I said, like there was a tendency to kind of romanticize their experience in the minor leagues. It was almost like for some guys, the guys that sign for a lot of money, they get a big bonus coming out of the draft, 6 or 7 figures. Minor league baseball basically amounts to college without having to go to class. Like you're getting paid to play baseball. You're really living off your bonus for the most part. You have that safety net. And the numbers, the percentages is the big leagues are made up. The majority of the big leagues are made up of those guys that have that safety net, that were top round picks. So they look back on the minor leagues as it sucked, but it was fun. Like, whatever, like we all had to do it. And I think as the dynamics have changed in Major League Baseball, we're starting to see, as we've seen training methods start to change, we've seen the ages start to change. Yes, we do have an incredibly good crop of young players that are in their early 20s, but we're also seeing guys break into the league when they're 28, 29, 30, 31 years old. Because things just started, they finally fell into place for them. They were able to figure some things out, and they were late bloomers. And I just think now that like MLB they have overplayed their hand here with the way that they've been manipulating players, especially early in their career when they first get to the big leagues. Because there's such a huge difference in Major League Baseball, even in AAA, just with the travel and the accommodations and obviously the paycheck, that players are more aware of that difference now than I think they've ever had before. So it's been pretty easy to start to convince guys to get on board with this. So MLB's done a lot of that work for us. But I think too, it's just goes back to communicating again, and like the horror stories that you hear, because players have been willing to speak up, players have been willing to share their experiences, has definitely helped to move the needle. Like Simon was saying, not just with MLB's front offices to get changes, but amongst MLB players, hearing from minor leaguers has helped move the needle in sentiment as well.
Okay, who wants to take that one next?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit on it. I think, you know, as we've been doing this for a few years, we've seen a number of minor leaguers that I've worked with in 2019, 2018, 2019 make their debuts and become sort of staples in the major leagues and in clubhouses. And I think those players are never going to be radicalized or you know, unradicalized by their experiences. And I think that's uh, becoming more and more common amongst major league players that I've talked to. I mean, there's a number of major league players have supported minor league players through More Than Baseball, through advocates for minor leaguers, through, you know, just posting about it on Twitter. And I think that's what it, I guess, what it takes to overcome that kind of ideology. But I also will say that like uh, coaches and staff in player development are also starting to shift their rhetoric a little bit from this like, you know, if you don't like it, play better mentality to this, yeah, we understand it's really frustrating to not get paid a living wage. Coaches and staff are treated like crap in the minor leagues too, and they're sort of, for a long time, I think they were perpetuators of this ideology, and I think they're becoming less so nowadays. As they're realizing like they're making $24,000 a year and trying to have a family at, you know, 30, 40 years old, and they're being paid like crap by major league teams too. So I think there's a lot of change happening, and like Sean said, I think it's MLB's doing by treating their workers like crap.
I love to hear that things are changing. Max, did you want to add anything about that sentiment? Oh, you're muted.
This is something I run up against a lot. You know, and it's crazy how, and it kind of makes sense, but how vicious sort of senior employee, like in the service sector where you're not making a lot of money anyway. But we have, you know, janitors in Detroit who have been on the job for like 37 years, someone in particular I'm thinking about, and she's making like 17 and change an hour. And it took her 37 years to get there. I mean, it took a really long time to get to 1730, you know, 17 and change an hour. And now, because of inflation, because of the labor shortage, like there is this compression, right? Where like new hires are coming up a lot because they need to pay people 15, 16 bucks an hour just to get them in the door. Now, I don't know how comparable this is to baseball players, but like, but still, you know, and then it feeds into this resentment though. They're like, I spent my whole life at this job to get to say, I've fought with every contract and I've shown up to every rally. And now people are coming in the door behind me making close to the same thing. And there's no real good way to have that conversation. It's emotional. It's not, I mean, it's, you know, that you can say, listen, the $3.50 an hour that you were making 35 years ago when you started working this, you actually had more purchasing power than you do now. But like, it doesn't matter. It's really, it's definitely, it's an emotional conversation. And I think that's where you need to meet them and really just explain, listen, this is like trying to create wage gaps between senior employees and junior employees, like that just is management further dividing you, right? And that's all they're trying to do. And in fact, this member of mine who's a janitor in Detroit, we're in huge contract negotiations there right now for their downtown janitors. She told her coworkers who were complaining about this stuff, like, she said, listen, this is, you know, her words, and I do swear a lot, so I apologize, but she's like, listen, the people who came before us fucked us big time. They bargained lower contracts, they bargained lower wages for newer employees so that they could get theirs. We've been doing the same thing for years. Now, like, we need to break the cycle, and that's it. Like, yep, people come in the door are going to make the same as us or very close to us. And you know what? Fuck it. That's the only way we're going to win. It's the only way we're ever going to win in the long run here. And that resonated with it, but that's a conversation that needs to happen between coworkers who know and trust each other, you know, in a really, I don't know, in a very kind of specific environment. That can't happen in a sterile like union organizer being like, hey guys, like it'll be fine.
I was gonna say, don't apologize for the swearing.
Max made me think of something too. That, like, I don't know how it is, Max, in unions that you've worked with, but like the talking about and informing our player members about what the guys before us have done and what they had sacrificed and the strikes and the lockouts that they went on, that they endured, changes a lot for guys, because like you look at the way that like the league minimum salary has gone from like $100,000 in the 1990s, and now it's up to $700,000. Like it'd be really easy for for people to be like, well, what do you need a raise for? What do we need to raise for? Let's just play. Like we have guys, we do have some guys that are like, I just want to play, man. I just want to play. But like most guys are like, no, like this is my job. Like we got to make sure we get as much as we can here. That's fair. But like having laid the groundwork for what the people before us have done, making sure guys recognize that and understand that, it helps guys. It helps us, toe the line and hold the line when we need to do it. But it also helps us have those conversations. That's like, yeah, we got to, yeah, okay, come over here. We got to talk about this because, with all the members we have, there's going to be differing opinions. We got to hash it out and remember that we're on the same side. We got the same common enemy to, for lack of a better term. And, let's just get everything out in the open and then we'll figure out the best way to move forward.
Well, that's it. And I don't want to take up more time because we're already past 9, but there's nothing more powerful than a member-to-member conversation.
And there's nothing more powerful than working through our differences to fight the billionaires. I think this is the most beautiful ending to one of the most beautiful DSA calls I've ever been on. Thank you so much to everyone for being a part. I don't know if any of the other organizers want to come on and like wave goodbye to everyone, but we appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone. Join DSA, build a union, fight for workplace rights. We love to see it. Thank you so much. And I will be emailing everyone soon with more action items. All right, good night, folks. Solidarity forever.